So basically, everyone answered this question, and we formed a word cloud. Word cloud? You know what? We can get started. Well, okay, perfect. So the question is, what do you think is still missing for us to get to a true A2A? And let's just take 30 seconds and look at this. Substrate never been built. Okay, that sounds good. All right. Sorry to keep y'all waiting. We're going to get the panel started. So the title of this panel is an A2A world, who builds it, who wins, and what's still missing. And I am Kathy. Nice to meet you guys. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dedalus Labs. We went through YC Summer 25, and we are building the fastest persistent VMs on the market. So I wanted to frame this conversation less as a narrow protocol conversation and more so just as a conversation about what happens when agents become real actors in the software economy. So today, when I refer to agent, or the concept A2A, we are talking about more so the agent native future in general and not just Google's protocol. I wanted to make that clear. But we will also talk about Google's protocol. So today, most agents call tools, and increasingly, they'll talk to other agents. They delegate work, they transact, they negotiate, and they also operate across organizational boundaries. So that raises a lot of questions, right? Who builds the rails? Who captures the value? What breaks first? And what infrastructure is still missing? So before we dive into it, I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen. I am a product lead at Stripe focused on agentic commerce and specifically within that, machine payments. This July, it would be 5 years for me at Stripe, having spent 4 of those years on crypto. So what I do think is really interesting is how in this new machine payments world, how we're basically thinking about things from like a financial infrastructure perspective, especially in like a fiat and crypto world.
Hey everyone, I'm Eric. I'm one of the co-founders of Sponge. Sponge is a YC-backed company. We just graduated from YC Winter 26. We're building financial infrastructure for AI agents. So we give your agents a credit card, a virtual bank account, a wallet that it can use to pay for things and transact online. Previously, I was at Stripe for 5 years. I worked with Jen, actually, on the crypto team together. And yeah.
Hey guys, good to see you all. My name is Ban Sethi. I'm from Google. I'm on this team called Global Founders Advocacy Team. It's a new function, and my team's job is to work with founders, make sure they're successful. And what that means is taking the best of what Google is building, DeepMind is building, and helping you wire that into your startups. And then the other half is, taking your feedback and working with our product team. So we are making the right products that will actually make you successful. I've been at Google over 5 years now. I came from VMware, and then before that, I've been a founder myself. So if you're building, I truly understand your hustle and grit, and I'm here to make you successful. So feel free to ask questions after this as well.
Hi everyone, my name's Casey. I'm a software engineer at OpenAI. I work on the connectors team. I think we're calling it that. I don't know what names we use anymore. And a lot of the responsibilities that me and my team have kind of revolve around building out a connectors ecosystem within ChatGPT, within Codex, making it good, and then kind of like running that like impossible balance between making a experience that's really good for users, really good for developers, and all around like really good for agents as well. So definitely happy to chat about kind of like the ecosystem within and without like ChatGPT as well as Codex.
Great. Just out of curiosity, raise your hand if you've been to a Dedalus event before. Okay, not too bad. We're really big on building community, so that's something that I'm also very keen on talking about. But the first question I'm going to give to all the panelists is, so when you hear the word agent native, what does that mean to you?
I think that, so basically a little bit of context. When Stripe started thinking about agentic commerce, which is essentially the area that makes the most sense for us to initially play in. We essentially first started with this use case of within your ChatGPT, like within your Claude, basically making it so when you're looking for like a white t-shirt to buy, you're able to actually see whatever suggestion that agent is suggesting to you, and then you as the human go and click that buy button, and you're able to do that within the context of your like chat bot that you are talking to. And I think what's interesting is that we've been working on that for a year and a half, 2 years plus at this point, but the world has changed pretty significantly, where at the time, maybe that was considered agent native, but I think that is out of date. And I think that's actually why we've been making a significantly more like higher investment in the concept of machine payments. And the idea of essentially we can start with these like chatbot-like interfaces, but the future is going to look a lot more like agents actually acting on your behalf autonomously. And then I think what Stripe has been calling like level 5 of agentic commerce is when agents are actually predicting your needs and using the ability to act autonomously to basically make your life easier, more productive, and more interesting. And what that means is that in order for that to happen, and for machine payments to be successful, I actually think that being agent native sounds really cool from like a marketing perspective, but actually just, yes, exactly. But it actually just means as a merchant, you just have to make yourself headless. Like you are only as good as your endpoints and your servers that you're offering for your agent, for the agents to hit on the other end. And to me, it basically means that the agent economy is equivalent to like the API economy or like and the equivalent of that. It's basically the economy without UI, and like the checkout page is just an endpoint, which is like not as fun to say, but is like the infrastructure that's needed for this to be successful.
Let me bounce off that a little bit. So I find it very interesting that you say, like, for example, like there needs to be enough API coverage for the things that the agent needs in order to successfully pay someone for some service and probably have like very clear tracking or like track record or traceability. So one of my favorite talks that I've been to recently is actually by the founder of Resend. Resend does like email APIs. And he talked a lot about like how great DX and great UX are important things of like the past era, but now it's also important to have great AX, agent experience. And part of what great AX means to me, this is something that we think about pretty extensively at Dedalus, is does your product or platform have enough coverage so that agents can actually access all the things it needs to? For example, like can an agent even sign up? Can an agent create a new org? Because that's something that a lot of people overlook. Can agents pay successfully? Can they actually access the tracing for the payment? Many different things that we don't really think about because it's so easy for a human to just click a few buttons and do it. But for agents, like everything comes down to APIs and CLIs, right? Does anyone have anything they want to add here?
I think I agree with most of, I think I have very similar thoughts as what you guys have. Yeah, like, to me, agent native means the business is optimizing their product and designing their product in a way where it's like agents are the main consumer of that product. And you know, their services and business is sort of geared towards supporting agents first and maybe human consumers secondary. So yeah, I think like not having a UI, yeah, I mean, a UI probably isn't the best interface for an agent to interact with your site. An API is a lot easier for agents to use.
I think one distinction that should be kind of made is that like when we're talking about an agent, it doesn't necessarily need to be a background agent, right? It could also be something that you're interacting with, you're steering, you're guiding. And being agent native is not about saying, I am not touching my computer anymore. It's a lot more about saying, I am touching my computer to provide like the high level steering that I think is necessary, and that like I feel comfortable with. Because we're all on this journey towards, I think, eventual AI psychosis, right? And we don't want to leave behind the people who are still thinking about ChatGPT and copy pasting things in and out of it, right? This is one of the most common, I would say, like failure modes that I see, for example, in our ChatGPT apps ecosystem, is a lot of people try to build apps that operate only as UI, that operate only to like allow people to like jump in and say, okay, open this widget and then touch things. When the reality is like having a much more nuanced approach where or hybrid approach rather, where like you are showing UI, you are presenting things to the user that are valuable to them that like the model doesn't necessarily, the model might be able to see, but like isn't easy for the user to see. For example, like a scroll carousel is a very common successful example of something that you see inside of agents these days, because it's so useful to understand very quickly what kind of things are available, and then like not making it so, for example, like hitting this edit button is required inside of your like inside of any sort of like user interface is, I think, like another piece that we are starting to push away from, and is making it a lot harder, like in the current era, for people to kind of like push and find new ways for us to interact with our models and for us to interact with our agents.
Maybe it serves as a good segue right now to let's just quickly define what an agent means. So what does an agent mean to you, Casey?
Absolutely nothing. I know there's a world in which like, I think there's a world in which like we can, I've had a lot of discussions where it's like, that's not an agent. And it's like, at the end of the day, I think that an agent really, especially as I relate to, because I was spending a lot of time working on the Codex plugins launch, right? And you can see like a lot of the things that you see between a plugin and, let's say, ChatGPT recently launched an experience called like the team agents. The difference between how you look at a Codex plugin or a Claude plugin and how you look at an agent inside of ChatGPT workspace agents, it looks the same. It looks exactly the same. The only difference really is that like that agent has some kind of trigger point. But I think to me that's something that's going to go away eventually. Like we do have hooks inside of plugins, for example, and we will have triggers inside of plugins at some point. So to me, it's like agent is going to be a marketing term. It is something that like we can assign a current value to it, but in the fullness of time, it's going to mean less and less, and it's going to be something that like I generally try to use as like, oh, my agent in terms of coding, for example. And like, sorry, that.
No. It's funny that you say that because if you go to SF, the word agent is on every single billboard you can ever find, right? Like it's such an overhyped up word. I used to work at Salesforce back when there were no agents and just workflows, and we called that agents, right? Like headless agents, things like that. And I think it's 100% a marketing word that people throw around without really defining it, which is also why I think definitions are really important. So I'm not sure if anyone here has seen me on Twitter, but I wrote an article a little bit like a while ago about, it's called Crossing the Imagination Chasm, which I think we are all in, and what it takes to get to an A2A wall. And I started with definitions because I think definitions define the ceiling of our imagination. And without properly defining the word agent, it's very hard to talk about this conversation. So here's my definition of agents. Feel free to disagree. In the developer world, like down to its roots, I think an agent is just any model, at least one model, that can act as your brain and think and reason, plus tools, so it can interact with the world, plus enough harnessing. So that's how I would define an agent. So does anyone have any other definitions before we proceed with a definition?
I think I can give you a simple definition that I like to think of an agent in terms of, when you can give something a goal and it can plan and reason and then act on that goal, even if it has not done that task before, it can still find a way to get there and then delegate if needed to other agents, and we can talk about those as well. So it's something that can plan and reason and then delegate on your behalf and still find a way to get to a final goal. I think that to me is an agent. And you can call it whatever you would like, but that's the the non-marketing definition that I go with. Yeah.
Wait, I 100% agree with that. I think the core fundamental thing about agents is that they are capable of reasoning, and hence they can tackle unfamiliar tasks, right? They're not predefined like a workflow, which means that they're by default unpredictable and undeterministic, which is great, but also why you really need good harnessing and good guardrails. Okay, with this definition in mind, let's revisit the question again. So I actually have a question for Bon, right? So we talked a lot about like what it takes to be agent native or like AX, but broadly speaking, I still think there are two types of companies right now. There are companies that started with just humans as their end users and then are trying to move towards becoming more agent native. And then there are companies that are agent native since day one. Like you're probably primarily just building for agents. So you work a lot with founders. What are some of like the trends and behaviors you've seen in recent founders and what ideas they choose? And why? Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's all over the spectrum. To be honest, I don't have a great answer to this. I see a lot of different founders. They're building agents that the type that we already talked about. Where they're still kind of they still have an interface, and an agent is doing something to that interface or with that interface, and then obviously founders like Eric here, they're building agents in the agentic commerce space and payment space. So yeah, it's a fast-moving industry, and I don't have I can't at this point say that this is kind of where the trends are kind of shifting.
In the YC ecosystem, what we've seen is that there are startups building services directly for agents. Like there's an AgentMail, there's an agent phone, and it's kind of like a Gmail for your agent. And so instead of a pretty-looking UI, it's an API that your agent can access.
Yeah, I think there definitely is like a very interesting dichotomy here, like, especially in YC, right? Like you have companies like Resend, which I just mentioned, email APIs for developers that are trying to become more agent native. And then you have companies like AgentMail, like they just serve email products to agents. And they're two very different companies, but like one day in the very near future, they're going to converge on the people or the users, broadly speaking, they're targeting, right? One thing that I want to point out here, because you cannot talk about agent nativeness without talking about what, again, like great agent experience is, great AX is. And a lot of what I've noticed so far, regardless of what type of company you are, like first or second, especially in YC as well, is that people don't understand what truly good AX is because they don't think they need it yet, right? They're like, oh, we're so early in this world. Like, it is unimaginable what an agent native future truly looks like. And therefore, I'm just going to target people that I can actually concretely see. And then when agents suddenly erupt, right, like proliferate, maybe that's the day I'm going to start thinking about great AX. I think that's the wrong take. My take here is that there are already countless agents scraping the web every single day. And if you don't make it into their training data now, as in like the agents cannot access your platform, they don't know what you do because you don't have a LLMs.txt on your website that tells them what your website does, and they cannot sign up and trial your product, then chances are you're not making it into Geo. You're not making it into the next model when it comes out. You are not making it into all the web searchable agents capable of web search when they're finding tools and they're recommending those tools to their human users. And you are already behind in the game. This is something that we have thought about a lot ever since, like, I want to say, since the day OpenClaw came out, maybe even before that, which is when I think the world suddenly woke up and they're like, oh, like agents can be really powerful. Like one general agent can really be powerful. But I think OpenClaw did not open up enough of the world's imagination. So next question, what is still under-imagined or unimaginable right now when it comes to what we talk about A2A?
One second. I think what is interesting and kind of relates to the earlier point is whether the outcome of what the agent is doing is for the agent or for the human. I think a lot of the examples that people talk about, especially with payments, is when the agent is buying something where the end consumer of that product is still the human. Like it's buying the Nikes, or it's like buying the API key that the human will then go and use, and like yes, that will definitely still make the human's life easier. And theoretically, an agent that's able to transact is more powerful than an agent that is unable to transact because it can interact with the outside world. But I think to what Eric had mentioned, if you look at the next generation of companies, if you really want to think about things that are like more on the frontier, I think it's actually about kind of like a recursiveness to it. So the outcome and the actual thing the agent is buying is something that it's going to use. So the end consumer isn't actually immediately the human, but it's actually the agent. And I think that gets you into this style of like right now people are using agents to do like complex tasks. They're just chaining like 1, 2, 3, 4. But I think it gets really interesting if you're able to actually have agents do recursive tasks for you. So the agent is going to buy something that it's then going to use to do something else. And then that is going to be something that it's going to use to do something else. And that level of complexity is something that is going to help. It theoretically is like way more powerful than just like a series, like a serial event that it can perform for the human. So I think like coming up with like those types of examples, I think is really important. I think this is where I could use everyone's help imagining what these recursive use cases would be. But an example is, for example, I think AgentMail is a good example of something being branded for an agent. They're using something that humans theoretically are doing today. But I would also even say things like V0, Lovable. What's interesting about that is theoretically you could have an agent basically try to do something for you, realize it can't, and then realize that it should be building something so it can do it for you even better. And then the thing that it's going to pay for it in order for it to build something is going to require other things, and then expands to this level of complexity that we don't need to worry about because your agent's taking care of it for you.
I think one thing that people aren't, or maybe they're just starting to sort of consider is that like, and this might be a whole nother discussion topic too, is that agents are eventually going to be like their own sovereign individual, like maybe like many years out, but like when that's the case, they're less of an extension of the human, right? Because that's what agents are kind of today. They're helping you get stuff, they're helping you do stuff. But when you start to view agents as like their own like thing that needs its own email address, its own food, which I guess is like tokens, then they'll need to buy stuff for themselves. And I think that's when I think A2A kind of stuff is going to get a lot more interesting.
It's interesting that you say that because I definitely agree that we are increasingly starting to think of agents as their own entities, right? They're not just like an extension of us or our company or our work. But when you think of that, what comes with an entity, my gosh, and aside from just identity and like email addresses and things like that, is also preference, right? And at its core, the preference is really what the foundation model was trained on and the weights and stuff like that. But every model has its own biases and the things that it prefer. And something that we talk a lot about in the YC community is this concept of buy versus build. Like, what does an agent prefer to buy or outsource as opposed to build in-house? And recent studies have shown that agents prefer to build basically everything in-house, even if it's worse. They just prefer to build it for some reason, based on depending on the model they use. And when that's the case, it's actually especially important to have specialized marketing targeted towards agents, whether it's going onto like Mobug and like running some kind of campaign directly targeting agents, or having really good LLMs.txt or really good skills that teach your agent how to use your product. If you don't have these things and don't clearly explain why, it's easier to buy your product versus just having the agent build it from scratch, then chances are your product's not getting used or seen or valued by agents. I think that's super interesting, right? So the next thing I'm going to talk about is, it's interesting that, again, so agents are entities, and like the value that they largely bring to us is the amount of productivity and work that they can do for us, right? At least in this current world. And recently, I believe it's Sequoia, has been talking about how SaaS is dead. PaaS is dead. Like, it is no longer about buying some subscription to some recurring service. It's just about what the value of the work is, like the work itself and work as a service or agents as a service. So I guess. In light of that, we actually had a product called Ask that we asked, funny enough, but it might still come out at some point down the line. So in light of that, I have a hot take. And my hot take here is that I think general agents are not what's going to win in the future. OpenClaw is a general agent. Hermes agent is a general agent. I don't believe in that. If work is truly the most important thing in this world, then I think work that is more specialized and tailored to you, your industry, your use case is going to be what's winning. And when you really look into what that entails, specialized agents, where experts in the field, knowing that use case, are going to create just for your personalized setting, I think that's really important. So I don't think general agents are going to win. What do people think?
All right. I'm pretty bitter lesson pilled here, and a lot of what I've seen is that like in general, a lot of the challenges with architecting an agent, right, and trying to build out eval, set up the harness, that's really freaking hard. And a lot of what we've seen with the development of skills over the last few months is that we have a lot of really good like pre-training data, and the models are getting increasingly good at instruction following. So I don't necessarily disagree that like specialized agents are going to like outclass general agents, but I think it doesn't follow that like general agents can't specialize, if that makes sense. A lot of the bets that like OpenAI has been making with Codex, for example, is that the harness is becoming a new class of like primitive, rather than something that like everybody is going to start building themselves. We've seen this from going from like LLMs are a next token predictor to LLMs are now giving you the next action, the next like blurb of text to show to the user, to the next like response to a tool call. And that's going to go further to the agent, or the LLM is now going to be a unit of outcome that like then we are going to tune, and we are going to like the current primitive is going to be plugins and skills. I think that there might be a next one. I hope not. But as we start building out more specialized agents, I think that the growth in the general agent capabilities are going to become narrower and narrower to the point where we are really just building plugins and evals. And that's going to be, in my opinion, a fantastic future, because it means that what we're talking about, specialization, is stripped down to its core. It's the domain knowledge, and it is the verification work that we are really just trying to build against.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's like a thing that happens in tech time and time again, where you bundle them just to unbundle them, and then you rebundle them. So, but the reason why that happens is because you need to unbundle them so that you can get really good at the niches, and then you aggregate them so then it's a better experience for everyone. And I think we'll follow the same cycle here as well.
I think I'll just say I think we're seeing a network of agents, that is getting popular, where you have a generalized agent as the front door, and it delegates tasks to specialized agents, that are domain experts, and can actually get that domain specific task done. A single model or agent winning, I don't see it happening that way. It's not economically viable or reliable. So. At least that's going back to your previous question, in terms of agentic development and what kind of agents we're seeing being built. It's a network of agents where one general agent kind of routes it to specific domain expert specific agents, and kind of, they coordinate to get the work done.
Could I bring up I'm curious about this, because I feel like this is something I just never got, because a bit of my experience has been like working on a lot of early iterations of agent builders, where we're actually really challenging the idea of for example, workflow builders and then like networks of agents in favor of a single loop that ends up being able to do most of the work in orchestrating. I'm curious to hear where you think that has failed, or do you think that in the limit that is going to start to fail, and why?
I think one of the things that I've seen is context rot happens. When you have like one big model kind of doing everything, context window, even if it is 1 million tokens, is still limited. It's arbitrary, right? So that starts happening, and then a lot of people are still writing prompts, and if you have to tweak the behavior of your application, you are doing that at a prompt level. And going back to the principles of software engineering, you ought to have separation of concerns, and if you're doing everything in one prompt, you are going to break it at some point. So I think that those are some of the things that I'm seeing, at least. Yeah.
Agree with context rotting, but okay, here's actually my take, but more refined. So I don't believe in general agents, but I do, and this is why I don't know where the future is headed, but I see a future where everyone has something like you described, like a personalized assistant, so a general router that then routes the specialized agents. I also see a future where that doesn't exist, or you have a personal assistant, but they're just your personal assistant. And then you still use different agents or different platforms with agents for different things like banks or food delivery or things like that. Which future is more likely to happen? I don't know yet. But going back to Casey's question, I actually think the problem isn't really context routing, it's that the harness isn't good enough. Part of harnessing is having, for example, a really good memory extension or a memory tool or a context management tool, right? Which is why this is a super hot space right now. And with the proper context management, you're not going to have context route, hopefully, as models get better, right? And with proper tools, you're probably going to, so plugins basically, or connectors, you're probably going to be able to access most things as well with a general agent, like a loop, in which the loop calls different things, but the loop sets up the guardrails so that it plans things in a way that makes sense for the agents to take action without having too much access to things. But this also brings me to the next point in our conversation. I want to talk a bit more about protocol. So Casey, you mentioned like plugins and connectors. These are really, to me at least, they're specific to a platform, right? Like an OpenAI plugin is just an OpenAI plugin. Like all these tools plug into OpenAI. But that's not a universal language that everyone speaks. So I know that, Casey, you worked on like early MCP products at OpenAI, and MCP has long since died, unfortunately. We started out with hosting MCP, and the MCP as a trend has died, but I do think the concept of having a tool calling protocol where models can call tools is important. I also think the concept of having a protocol where models can interact with other models is important, whether that is Google's A2A or something else that involves not just like interaction, but also payments, also other things, right? Or delegation, right? Like a multi-agent architecture. I don't know what that's gonna look like yet, but I think protocol is still very important. What's your take on that? Like tools cannot just plug into OpenAI, right? It needs to be able to plug into anything that everyone chooses to use.
My favorite flame war. This is funny because actually, I think I saw over the weekend my manager ended up having a very weirdly controversial Hacker News post about this, talking about the state of MCP because there was another MCP is dead blog post on Hacker News on Saturday.
What's new?
Yeah, it's been going on since I think late January was the original post that Eric Holmes put up. So I have my take on like whether or not like or what protocol it is like I personally think the future is like I don't care what the protocol is. What I care is that we're all speaking the same protocol.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah, it's like this is to me it's like so one of the older terms about this back from the 70s is this thing called Lisp curse. And essentially, like, if you know Lisp, it's like it's a programming language that is so powerful that you can write just about anything in it natively. And then as a result, everything that, like, every limitation about it is gone. So what happens is that all the technical problems, and this is kind of from the original post, they become social problems. I want an if statement. I can write an if statement in 15 different ways in Lisp because it's so powerful. I can build out my own like parser in any way that I want. And I think we're running into something very similar with agents where the agent can figure out any CLI. It can figure out any API, right? But what we're running into is we need to coordinate on that, and we need to make sure that like when we're talking about, like, for example, the observability aspects, when we're talking about making sure that like the agent experience is good, speaking the same language makes a lot of that a lot easier, right? CLIs still don't have a lot of the solutions there around like, oh, how do you observe it? How do you make sure that the permissions are wrong? How do you eval against how do you eval against it? Or like even how do you make sure that this runs the same way on everybody's computer? MCP, I think, is really powerful, not necessarily because the protocol is better than CLI or that the tool exposure is necessarily better, but because we are all using it. And the more that people are using it, the better it gets. And that's why we see a lot of enterprises kind of going all in on MCP gateways. I think that'll change, to be clear. A lot of our thinking internally has been, we don't know what that future will be. We want to be able to support it all. But I think that MCP has become a really powerful way to do that, because anytime you run into a limitation, it is an open world and we can talk with everybody and make sure that we're all on the same page. I tried to kill MCP at OpenAI last year. That's and funny. I just like and the response I got was like, what's wrong with it? And I was like, oh, it doesn't have trigger support. Oh, it doesn't have like long running tasks. And I was like, go fix it.
You know, that's so funny because I'm gonna come back to this, but MCP died because everyone went on the skills train, right? And then skills died because everyone was like, oh, CLI is just much cooler. Guys, they're not the same thing. Like, MCP is a protocol. Skills are tools. They're really just markdown files that tell you how to use tools, right? And then CLIs are like glorified SDKs. They're really simple SDKs. They're not really a protocol that everybody speaks at once. And MCP as a protocol, at least in its early stages, like it definitely sucked, right? It was a really bad protocol. It was really primitive. There wasn't a lot of things that is solved, but that's not really a protocol level. Sorry, let me think about how to phrase this. That's not really a unsolvable problem. As a protocol, you can keep evolving so long as everyone is still using it. So funny that you say that, but like if you fix things at the protocol level, like for example, one really big complaint about MCP was that it bloated up too much context, right? As skills, you can selectively load something in. As MCP, everything shows up and your model's context rot. But really, like you can also selectively load MCPs, right, at the protocol layer or the infrastructure layer. Then you're probably fine. And I believe this has been solved, and many other things along the way as well. Long horizon tasks was one of them. But then at the SDK level, because we used to build an open source SDK, we solved that, right? A lot of people were building better harnessing in the infrastructure layer, which I believe sits one layer above protocol, in order to fix things. But fundamentally, like I completely agree that we just all have to speak the same language, and unfortunately we do not at the moment. But under the hood, like we still use MCP, which is really funny, even though it's completely died on Twitter. I want to pass this question along to Jen and Eric now. What is converging in the payments protocol layer?
A lot. There's definitely nothing that everyone agrees on in terms of payments. Yeah, I think everyone is sort of incentivized to like put their protocol first. We have X402, MPP, Stripe, I'm sure, has like a bunch of extra stuff too. Google has UCP, A2A. So yeah, I think it's just like there's a lot of stuff out there. No one's really agreeing on it, and we'll have to see what plays out.
I think that is totally fair. I think how I would think about the protocols is essentially each of them are solving some sort of matrix in the like agent payment journey, like a user journey, but for the agent. So let's say an agent has to do, like is trying to figure out how to perform this task for the human. And then along the way, it has to go make a payment. Step one is that they actually have to do the discovery of the service that it needs to actually use to perform the task. Step two is they need to like actually encounter the agent equivalent of a checkout page and know like how much it costs, like what they can pay with, things that you would like humans would see on like the checkout experience. Three, and this goes to like the trust layer and identity layer of it all. It needs to prove who it is, or prove that it's good or bad, or prove whatever the like end merchant needs it to prove. 4, it needs to actually make the payment. And then 5, in some cases, it actually needs to actually have the fulfillment. So it actually needs to receive the end product. Those are the 5 steps that all the protocols play some sort of role in. And I think that's actually good, because if those 5 steps remain the same, then it kind of doesn't matter, because the agents will use whichever protocols make sense for whatever steps it needs to do. So for example, the set of machine payments protocols, which include X402 and MPP, which we co-authored with Tempo, is essentially mainly opines on the payment challenge, which was step 2, and the payment step itself, which was step 4, and a little bit of step 5, which is actually receiving the paid resource on the other end of the 402 challenge. A little bit of primer in case folks don't know what the machine payments protocols do. They basically, these are protocols in which it uses the HTTP 402 response code, basically telling the agent that payment is required, and the actual delivering of the paid resource is in the same HTTP request as the payment is, or as the agent is trying to make the payment. But I think what's interesting is that people are like, oh, like, how do I use, like, should I use that, or should I use UCP or ACP? And I'm like, you can use both. It kind of doesn't matter, because ACP, UCP opines on different parts of it. So it actually has much more of like the cart building experience. That is actually the step above the payment piece. It includes a payment piece, but the machine payments protocols can just be a payment handler in UCP, ACP anyways. So I think as long as the 5 steps, as long as the protocol is solving one of the 5 steps, it can like go forth and conquer whichever step that it wants to do, and the agents will basically be able to use whichever one makes the most sense for them.
That's interesting. So Jen is definitely biased from the Stripe team, but Eric, which protocol do you think is currently winning?
I really don't think there is like a winning protocol right now. Like,
why is that? What is like the biggest discourse?
It really is just like everything's out there. I think everyone kind of supports everything. Like we, for example, we support everything. So like an agent with a Sponge wallet can interact with every protocol and pay however the protocol is supported by the business. And you know, on the business side, on the merchant side, I think they're also incentivized to just have support for everything as well, because you know, why leave some agents hanging if they only have to support one protocol? And so really we just have like a bunch of these different protocols, and you know, you could use one to buy an API key or use another one to buy an API key. And that's where the state things are right now. I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of agree, because we also actually support all of them. We're also on the foundation for X402, so a little bit of everything. But I actually think that it reminds me of the proliferation of payment methods, actually. So at Stripe, we think about payment methods a lot, because we need to meet consumers wherever they are, regardless of whatever they're paying from, because our merchants want to accept all these different types of payment methods. But you look at even the list of like digital wallet payment methods that exist out there. Each country has their own, and they're all like slightly tailored to that country's like banking model. And it's fine. Like everyone's going to use whatever makes the most sense for them. And I think that the space is too nascent for anyone to king make anything, because if you do, then you're just really like holding the industry back. And there's not, you know, like both X402 and MPP do not have enough transactions for like the turf wars to really begin. Maybe like later on when things are really, when agents are actually continuously making transactions, but it's too early.
Yeah, it's definitely super nascent. It's like you look at X402 MPP volume, it's like, oh, we're in the lead, but it's like 2 hobos fighting over who's richer. It's like, you know.
Wait, such as like the predicament of building software, right? Like especially in the developer tool space, like you cannot be that opinionated. You have to be unopinionated enough to support a lot of things and a lot of different use cases. But at the same time, like opinionated enough so that like you don't have to actually build everything. We're not at that stage yet, obviously, right? Here's my prediction for the future. People are very scared to make predictions for the future, but I am not. because I am not biased. But my prediction for the future is that there are at least two ways in which we will eventually converge, if we ever do, on a payment protocol. And one is if a big player in the space, like Stripe or someone else, decides to be opinionated. They're like, we're only going to support something and we're just going to really push for it. And given that a lot of people are building on us, they just have to do it or we're just going to cut them off. That's one way in which like a payment protocol can settle. It's also one way in which a big lab, a big model lab can close their ecosystem, right? Another way in which a protocol can converge is when, like Jen said, enough people are just using it and the trend kind of like plays itself out. We will probably not get there anytime soon because most people don't have agents and most agents are not paying, unfortunately. And most people's agents are not readily accessing like blockchain technology, for example, because most people don't really understand. But once agent payments, again, this is totally my opinion, but once agent payments move towards something a little bit more accessible, like Ramp's agent card, a card that a human understands because we all use credit cards, I think it's going to be a very different world. Or, for example, once ChatGPT can directly buy something for you and you trust it to do so, right? Like there are cases in which like the numbers will eventually go up. But before that happens, like I think we're still like, unfortunately, a very long way away.
I don't work in this space, so I'll leave it to the experts. But I think the trust and adoption, like trust is what's missing right now. You know, it's super early. I think the tech is there. I mean, there are many protocols and, you know, obviously some protocol could win at some point. I think some of the use cases that need to be solved for are what happens if an agent makes the wrong payment or, you know, something needs to be returned. You know, I can get an Amazon package today, return it tomorrow. You know, it's easy. You know, how do agents do all of that, right? I think those are some of the use cases I think that need to be solved for before I think a protocol wins. I don't know what your take is, but that's what that's how I think about, you know, giving money to my agent to, you know, do shopping on my behalf.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is probably in like the top 3 questions the average merchant that speaks to us about agentic commerce thinks about. And what's interesting is that in the data, there hasn't actually been, it's like less fraud than just like the average amount of fraud that's happening on these merchants at Stripe. So like practically it's actually currently not happening. However, I do agree. I think that I would think about it mainly based on 3 questions. Most merchants care about if it's a good bot or a bad bot. Second, it cares about which human this bot belongs to. And then third, it cares about if it's like a new or returning bot. And that's usually maybe less so, like it's a bit fraud related, but it's also a little bit of like more on the positive side, like loyalty and like all of those pieces that me and you know about when we go and shop and like subscribe to things, think about. And so I think that's something that we're trying to figure out what to do here in this space. But to be honest, it actually hasn't prevented merchant adoption because the data is so early, which I think is good because it allows for experimentation, but we do know we have to solve it.
I think there are a couple important components, right? Let's break down what Jen just said. Like, first of all, merchants care about identifying the end buyer, I guess, the person or agent buying. And when you break it down, really, it's authentication, right? How do you authenticate the identity of the buyer and also their intent, which is really hard, actually. And along other things, metadata, like returning or not. There is also, aside from authentication, liability involved, right? Like if this buyer doesn't pay me, or I don't know, like the money doesn't come through. I don't work in this space, clearly. Who is liable, right? Is the person behind that? How do you ensure there is a person behind the agent buying? Things like that. What's Stripe's take on this?
I think it's a good question. So the liability usually happens post-payment. So this is like the whole world of disputes and chargebacks. So that's the main thing that merchants worry about. So the liability shift for disputes and chargebacks for human payments basically is the role that the payment processor, the card network, and the issuing bank play. So an example of all three of those stakeholders would be Stripe is a payments processor, Visa is a card network, Visa, MasterCard is a card network, and then like Chase, Capital One, blah, 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 are the issuing banks. And what's actually interesting about the whole like disputes and chargeback mechanism is basically if a consumer issues a chargeback, the merchant by default is liable, but they can present a like evidence packet to the issuing bank. The issuing bank can then decide, oh, like I agree, I'll like take on the risk and like basically give the merchant back the funds. Or they can go into this process called arbitration, and then that involves the card networks. And then that's essentially like the entire ecosystem that exists. So just like a little bit of like a payments 101 piece. And I think it's interesting because what's cool about the like agentic payment space is that each of those stakeholders are actually actively working in agentic commerce. So the liability shift and all those questions basically is something that we talk to the card networks about. And essentially they being a big part of like the arbitrator in this ecosystem also have like a stake in the game too. So that's a current world. What I think will happen is when we have the ability to have agents like prove themselves in that like framework that I laid out, that's where the liability shift could happen. Currently, what exists is equivalent of when the App Store came out and parents will basically made a big deal about their kids stealing their iPad or iPhone and like racking up like a $3,000 bill on some app or game. And at the end of the day, the parent is still theoretically liable because it was like a authorized transaction by the kid that that is responsible for it. But the liability shift is going to happen when we can like partner with the card networks and issuing banks to basically manage the risk. And this is where it's like, ideally, we would love to solve it in a way that just like helps the whole ecosystem and make it so we can keep the bad actors out.
So far, we've been talking about like the merchant trust angle of like merchants trusting that the agent is being a good actor in buying stuff. But there's also like the consumer trust angle of consumers actually trusting that their own agent is buying the thing that they want it to buy. And I think that to me is the bigger blocker for more widespread adoption of agentic payments in commerce, because I think merchants will just support any sort of good business that's happening on the platform. But what really needs to happen is consumers need to fully trust their agent to like buy the thing that it wants to and like know its preferences and like reliably choose the right product. And I think that's like actually the missing trust piece.
So Sponge is a wallet, right?
Exactly.
So which part of the thing, the whole process that Jen described, are you responsible for?
Yeah. So the actual like order execution part where it's like, I know what I want to buy because my agent is like magically aware, right? So we're not exactly solving that quite yet. But yeah, we help you do the actual like purchasing after you figure out what to buy. But that is actually probably the big blocker for this like proliferating. And so maybe that'll come from the agents and the models having like a persistent memory of who you are and like your preferences. I think that could be a thing. I think we just need like a better personal assistant agent sort of setup. And I think OpenClaw was like sort of the start of that, where it's like it has like that persistent memory. But
True. I think the super scary thing about building a wallet is that it holds real money, right? And when you hold real money, lots of things can happen, obviously. But for example, what if someone charges back? Or like your agent wants a refund, or like money needs to go in and then out and then in and then out again. How does liability play into that for Sponge?
Yeah, I mean, so agents are still sort of the extension of yourself, and so like legally you are liable for everything that your agent does.
So you like very strictly verify the identity of the human.
Well, you can set limits, so it's sort of just like your Ramp or Brex card where you can set spending limits on, my agent can only spend at these merchants or only spend like this much, and if it spends past like $10 or whatever, it has to like ask me for manual approval. There's also like the agentic card networks. They have their payment protocols like Visa Intelligent Commerce, MasterCard Agent Pay. Those generally require you to always like say, I'm spending at this merchant. I'm spending this much for this reason. So there's like that audit trail for why you're making this purchase. So that's like the liability part of it. But for us, we just handle like the transaction. So
fair enough. Yeah. When we were working with Stripe, one of the biggest reasons why we chose to work with Stripe was because we didn't want the liability of having to do KYB and KYC, like knowing your customer or the business you're working with when you're doing the transaction. But in the case of knowing your agent, like KYA, how do you really identify intent of an agent? Is it like a credit score thing, or like I don't actually know?
So I think first you have to be able to lay the foundation for basically the agent to prove, like basically I think the main foundation to lay right now is for the agent to prove which human sent them. So making that connection ahead of the actual spend intent or request, I think it's really important. So I think that layer, even at its most basic level, has not been solved in a way that makes sense. So I think we should work on that.
Low-hanging fruit right there. Not that low.
Yes. And then I think the layer on top of it, the way that people have solved it right now is a little rudimentary, where I think like Eric was saying, basically what happens is that the agent has to seek approval for everything it has to do outside of the spend policy that you have given it. So I think the other thing is how do you make your spend policies as equivalently non-deterministic as your agent? I think that's like the actual really interesting layer to operate in, because right now the spend policies are like, oh, if you spend more than $10, like let me know first and I'll like click a button and then you can go ahead and make the payment. But what you would actually want to do is set a range and then say like beyond this range is a deal breaker. Within this range is fine. And as a human, you are making a contractual agreement with your agent that is what you're authorizing it for it to do. And I think that's where it gets like more interesting, more dynamic, and actually enables us to have those really interesting use cases where your agent is like surprising you with like predicting your intent. So I think agent intent is almost like like we want to get to a point where like that is actually helping the human, not the human like setting every single individual intent like one by one, because it would then it's like very brute force actually.
So the interesting underlying like thought concept that Jen is actually touching on is this thing that we started talking a lot about NYC and also on Twitter. It's the trust by default mode. I think that's what it's called, right? They look a little bit bored, and I'm gonna throw this question towards the other side of the panel, but trust by default is something that we are starting to adopt, especially in the harnessing layer when working with models or chatbots, depending on like developer or consumer. What are some of like the interesting use cases and also like behaviors you guys are starting to see emerge when it comes to like not having to humanly approve everything? So the human is not always in the loop, but still sort of need to be in the loop, I hope.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, especially for Casey on Codex, because I realize when people think about like agent payments, they think about what we've been talking about, buying something. But you know where I've been spending money and just trusting my agent to do whatever it wants is when I'm in like Claude Code or Codex and I'm like, oh, like solve this problem for me. And it gets to just spend whatever it wants. And then sometimes it builds something and I'm like, wow, you wrote that very inefficiently. Go fix it. And I'm like, I'm letting it spend more money to fix a problem that it created for itself. So I'd particularly like to hear your take on this regarding the coding agents.
Okay, so just to make sure I got the question right, it's about the like a trustful world, and then talking a bit more about like, oh, the actual cost of running an agent in itself.
And emerging behaviors and use cases.
Okay, so I guess some grounding understanding. So Codex has introduced like, so when we first launched the apps ecosystem in ChatGPT, the safety team was scared. They were like, they did not like this, and for a couple of very valid reasons, right? Prompt injection and data exfiltration are kind of the two main threat like threat vectors that we were looking at. So actually, the way that this works is very similar to what's in Codex now called, I think, Guardian mode or like auto approve, that Claude Code then copied. And a lot of the movement there has been from going to manual approval to like full auto approval to like this kind of in-between state. And talking about like, oh, how are we going to make it so that like when we build trust, the challenge with trust is, one, we have to make sure that we have it. And two, we have to make sure that the trust that we build scales with model capabilities. So a lot of the failure modes of kind of like agent builders in 2025 was that the trust modes were not there yet. We didn't figure out a lot of these kinds of questions. Nowadays, with things like auto approve, I think this is getting a lot better where like we have models that are like building and understanding your entire agent trajectory to make things safer. Around the costing, I think that's something where I work at a token factory. So this is something that I don't experience from a day-to-day basis. I think I checked my stats yesterday and I'm at like 8 billion tokens in the last 7 days. And no, literally, I don't even do more. I just like, all I did was like this technique a coworker taught me, open 3 sub-agents to simplify your code, open 3 sub-agents to deeply review your code. It's glorious. Anyway, I think a lot of the question around cost efficiency is about to become very important, to be clear. I don't think there's a clear answer here yet, but I do think the one thing that we are going to start seeing is that like that judgment is starting to become something that like we are starting to crystallize, and then once it's crystallized, it can be post-trained. And that's what I'm really excited about. You actually do already see a lot of this kind of work where it's like, you see like online, there's a lot of people who like build like ROI analysis for like Claude Code runs, for example. And I think that idea is something that like the community is going to shake out well before the core harnesses will.
Yeah, I think in general, what I would say is instead of looking at it as a binary, I look at it, and what I'm seeing in the field is, thinking of it in terms of a dial you can turn in terms of risk and scope. And it's not always, human in the loop or human out of the loop. It's the trend right now, at least right now, is human on the loop, where humans are setting some guardrails and assigning their agents budgets and giving them some high-level caps, and the agent acts within that boundary, and that's a goal as well, right? Full autonomy within that boundary, and the human only gets nudged or pinged, when the edge of that boundary is reached. So at least that's what how we are tackling it today, and what I see how field is handling it as well.
Going back to emerging behavior and use cases, I'm also curious, for example, so Eric mainly works with agents, but also developers who develop agents, right? And also, I guess like Stripe also works with merchants, but I'm curious, what are some of like the more popular use cases right now? Because again, like revisiting, we cannot even imagine what an agent native world looks like. So help us imagine.
Yeah, like my favorite go-to use case on our platform is like this guy who runs Airbnb, a couple of Airbnb rentals, and he's also an OpenClaw power user. And so he loves just using his instead of hiring some guy to like help manage his Airbnb, he asks his OpenClaw to kind of do sort of like the simple tasks such as restocking paper towels and toiletries, booking cleaners. And so he kind of treats his OpenClaw as his personal assistant to do that. And so they need to make payments. And so
How
that's.
does he know when to restock?
Oh, it's like it reads his Airbnb like itinerary or like his schedule, and it knows when people are checking in and out. If someone complains, I think it notifies his OpenClaw agent. That's one use case. Another one we've seen is people using agents to manage their financial portfolio and having their agent, buy certain tokens when they're trading. This is on the crypto side of our product, buying tokens or stocks. We also support prediction markets. So some people are using their agents to gamble on things. buy some, buy the Knicks money line and stuff like that. So.
I think those are really good examples of like the personal agent use case. I think in addition to that, when we think about the target user set, I would say P0 are essentially software. So I think that like P0 is like what I guess we would call like stateless software, where it's pay per use. So it is like deep search, research, browser use, WAFs, maybe like document processing. And then I think the next layer is stateful software. So this is where it's like content generation, image generation, things where you kind of maybe would want actually some more association with like an account, and you actually need it to be a little bit stateful. Then after that is the idea of like data access and actual media. So like it's like the classic like paywall use cases. And then I think this is where, and the reason why those are like the main ones that we see so far is because those are inherently already headless, like going back to like the first answer that I had, where they're most set up for success because they're already selling something that is an endpoint or like a tool. Then I think that where we see desire for a set of products to be machine payable is where you get into like services, digital goods, travel, hospitality, retail. For those, I think you get a lot of like really big names experimenting, which is really cool. And we need to basically help them become more headless in order for them to like participate in this economy, which is why like the stateless and stateful like software pieces are like the target. And then the other verticals are ones that we want to help, but probably are not going to be the most immediate thing.
So I am very time conscious, and it's been more than an hour since we started talking, and they were worried we couldn't make it 1 hour, but I was like, no, don't worry about that. But I want to revisit the title of this panel, which is who wins and what's missing. Like, you're all probably here because, like, raise your hand if you're a founder or want to found. Okay, so pretty much the entire room, right? Like, you're here because you want to know what to build. Like, is the thing you're building the right thing to build? Is the thing you want to build something that will have PMF now or in the future? So let's revisit this idea. And I want to start by telling an anecdote. So Dedalus actually pivoted a little bit. We started, we went into YC Summer 25 hosting MCPs and building an open source multi-model agent SDK. And the reason why we pivoted around 2 months ago to doing VMs is because we were too early. And sometimes being too early is good, but most of the time it is not good because you just don't have a market, right? Like, do I still believe in the thing I built? Yes. Do I still think that sometime in the future it's multi-modelness is going to matter? Yes, because I don't think people want to be locked in to one thing. But that being said, last year, I guess, 10 months ago, I could not imagine that the VM space, for example, is a space that's going to be super hot because we didn't have OpenCloud needing to be hosted somewhere. Most people didn't need to host their agents. They just run it locally. Or, for example, we didn't really have Cloud Code when I first started, which is kind of crazy. So there isn't really the use case of having 10 Cloud Code agents running at the same time with 3 reviewing your work and 3 cleaning it up, right? Things like that. But now there are, and this is a new emerging field, which is also why the VM space is super hot. And like Jen said, statefulness is something that people now care about, running long horizon tasks or just tasks where the agent remembers and continues to do things recursively, like important stuff, right? Which is why we are building fast persistent VMs. But what are the other low-hanging fruits in this space? Another example I can say is recently ChatGPT gave me an ad, which I'm not very happy about, but 2 years ago, nobody would have thought, right? When GPT 3.5 first came out, that you can actually see ads there. And yes, GEO kind of did that for us, but now OpenAI is endorsing this as a platform. So what are some new emerging sectors or products people should be thinking about building? And what are the remaining or new emerging low-hanging fruits in this space?
If I knew, I might be working on it.
I guess I think the very durable answer to this is going to be infrastructure for what everyone else is building, right? The challenge always is can you find PMF, and can you build something that is usable faster than anyone else, especially now in this space. So the thing that I've seen happen time and time again is the thing that even if it's built for 2025 ages ago, and it's actually super powerful for 2025, the value is still there, right? I think one example is MCP gateways, where yeah, maybe the Twitter hype has died down around MCP, but gateways are still signing 3-year contracts. It's still something that's extremely durable as a result of this. And yep, and there's still some crazy deals to be found there. On the consumer side, which I think is a little closer to my heart, I would say we're still waiting for a killer app inside of all of these AI ecosystems. I think that we're moving from a world in which people are seeing AI agents, embedding AI agents, and for lack of a better word, ChatGPT kind of embeds into your help desk software, to something where we want to see integrations inside of your AI agents. And I think for a consumer, for a business, that's really easy. You just sign a contract and you go. People are already very good at doing the diligence. What if 95% of them fail right now? That's going to change. For consumers, that story is a lot harder right now. And I think that the killer app for something that doesn't exist inside of a site on its own, that doesn't work inside of ChatGPT on its own, you bring it together and you make those two things work together better than each one of them works individually, has yet to be found. And that PMF still, I think that PMF is still to be found and still to be taken.
I would say trust and governance layer. Many people are building agents, but not many or very few are actually looking at how to debug multi-agent systems when two agents are stuck in a negotiation loop, or they fail to communicate effectively. A lot of studies have been done in the last 12 months, 18 months, and I was surprised. About 20%, about 70 to 85% of the prototypes that started in the last 18 months, they never made it to production. And that's a big bottleneck for enterprise adoption. They need to trust that your agents will solve their problems, and they also need full end-to-end observability and full audit trails, right? So there's a big gap there. And other thing I would add is solving their data quality issues, data lineage issues. That there's a big gap there as well, because if you give an agent non-compliant bad data, it's not going to get better over time. It's just going to make bad decisions at a much faster rate. So and that's a big bottleneck for enterprise adoption as well. So if you want to make big money, that's where I think you should focus.
Hear from the man himself.
I think going to Casey's point about a killer consumer app, I think that is definitely what we're all waiting for. I don't think it's low-hanging fruit, but I do think if you were able to do that, you're going to be able to capture tremendous amounts of value. I know operating in the infrastructure tooling space, and maybe it's because I'm constantly bombarded by what's going on in this space and seeing all the competitors in the space. But there's a lot of picks and shovels kind of plays, and we're all kind of just waiting for the gold diggers. Where are the actual consumer apps utilizing agents effectively that need payments? So I don't know if it's low-hanging fruit. I don't think there's that much low-hanging fruit, because if it was, then someone would probably be building it already, or it would have been done by someone or the Frontier Labs or something. But there's still definitely value to be captured because we're all waiting for a killer consumer app for sure.
I think for me, and this is really going full circle, one, basically building anything that enables businesses to become headless, and doing that on a per vertical basis or on any sort of niche that you and your team have a specific reason to be successful in, I think that's a no-brainer. There's so many merchants out there that like finally got their like website running how they thought it should be running, and then now they have to go deal with this new and emerging economy. And essentially, if you look at the businesses, you look at all that trend that has happened in other shifts. Like one is getting everyone's websites ready. Two was actually getting everyone to like get a mobile app. This is like the new version of it. So basically, if you're going to be building a way where it's your business is helping these types of businesses go headless, that's going to be huge. And then two, I think a huge part of our thesis is all around payments. So I would love for someone who's building like either a consumer-facing agent or a business-facing agent to just integrate the ability for that agent to pay natively, and to actually prove to everyone that an agent who can transact is more powerful than an agent who cannot.
Adding on to what Jen and everyone else said here, but here's my different take. I'm not waiting for a killer app. I'm waiting for many killer apps because I don't think there will be a killer app. Why is that? Let me elaborate. Again, going back to what I said when I gave another hot take, I don't believe in a general agent precisely because I think what matters in the future is experience that is tailored to you. And in order for that to happen, you need a lot of context on the user. Context comes from data, it comes from memory, it comes from your behavior online, your usage of different apps, hopefully that are not closed ecosystems, and literally how you interact with AI, right? This is all context that matters. It comes from tracking newer types of data. There are so many types of data out there we are not tracking. And this is so interesting to me. Unfortunately, I'm not building in that space, but like, should we be tracking eye movements when someone looks at a screen? How many times a person blinks, their pupil dilation, like where the cursor is clicking? These are a lot of things that we don't really track because we don't even have a file format for stuff like this, right? Or like the amount of times a person's breath pauses if you're using something like Plot, or like a AI note taker in real life that records something, right? Like things like that. What is the file format? I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, it makes any experience more personalized to you. And when an experience is personalized to you, it cannot be generalized, right? So I actually think there's going to be many killer consumer apps out there that are specialized. They have domain expertise and they make your exact use case great. But let's take a step back because that doesn't mean anything. So a lot of what I see in YC, and as a infrastructure company, we don't build in the application layer, but I see a lot of applications. A lot of what I see in YC is when, for example, you take something only accessible to a small group of people, usually developers or their agents, and you make it consumer accessible. So for example, Cloud Code into Cloud Cowork. So that now everyone can use Cloud Code, even though developers are already using Cloud Code for Cloud Cowork use cases. Similar things where you take something and you make it easier to access for merchants to build their websites on like better recommendation ad algorithms or things like that, or easier for a consumer to do something that they could not because they just cannot get over a small technical barrier to using Cloud Code like back in the day or something like that. That's one thing. Another thing that I'm seeing a lot of is actually very tailored enterprise use cases. So when you're building for developers, it's still actually very different than like when you build specifically for enterprise, who usually have stricter data requirements, stricter privacy requirements. They need to follow a lot more different things. That's also probably how you get acquired, by the way. But that being said, I think these are like two different routes. Obviously, there are also a lot of things in the agent space, right? So I'm friends with the founder of AgentMail and AgentPhone, but funny enough, AgentMail was actually in my batch, summer 25 YC. And when they first started building AgentMail, nobody gave a shit, because nobody thought it mattered for agents to own emails because nobody used agents back then. But they just had this really clear thesis. And I remember talking to Adi from AgentMail. I'm like, why do you guys just like believe so much in this vision of the world? They were like, because we were opinionated. And we just believed that one day agents would become entities and therefore need to own email addresses and ways of communication. AgentMail, unfortunately, is not a protocol. It's a tool that allows people to communicate, but eventually it actually sits on an email protocol layer, right? But there are also things to be done with existing protocols. A lot of low-hanging fruits there that Casey can probably talk more about, and Bon can also talk more about. There are lots of new things that agents now, as entities owning identities and other things, need, not just wallets, but probably like, I can't even imagine. Sorry, guys. I'm suffering from the exact same problem everyone else is, right? Like, I'm not crossing the imagination chasm yet. But, okay, what else? And last but not least, I think portability is actually a really important thing. I'm just like thinking about what to build. But something that I've noticed, and this has more so to do with model labs than anything else, is people like to use different things because different models perform differently on benchmarks. Different models are good at different things. They have different personalities. And this will only become more apparent in the future, right? As base model capabilities all become really good, it comes down to very nuanced things like cost, like personality, like performance on a certain specialized benchmark, things like that, or even like how trustworthy or how unhinged this model is, right? When this is the case in that version of the future that I think is very near, it matters that you're able to use different models together, or one step up, not just models, but different tools together, right? Different people, CLIs or skills or whatever, CLIs or other things. And hence portability is very important. Can your tool plug into many different things, at the same time take data or things you own from one platform and take it to another? Many cases it's a context management or like a memory tool, but it could also not be, right? Portability in real life, also important. AI note take. I'm talking a lot, but there's a lot of things you guys can all touch on. Before I open up to questions. Oh, like properly that's it? Oh, y'all, this panel took way too long. Okay, you know what? Let's end with one last question. Who has a burning question? And then we're just going to let y'all out. Okay. Sorry.
For those of you who are building agent systems, please, for dear God, use something neurosymbolic using theorem provers and delegated permission systems like deontic logic so that we don't have to clean up security messes in the future.
Thank you, Ben from the Linux Foundation. Okay, I think we do have time for one more question. Yes?
How do you guys see the future of interfaces? I will elaborate. I think that we use in the last decades to have buttons, colors, and screens as how human interacted with the machine. But that's over. We know it. How do you see it's coming forward? And to add to this, I feel like the user used to be more proactive to the machine, where the machine we're passive and the machine is active to us. How do you see all that thing emerge and connects to, 5-10 years from now?
My take on this is that everything your product offers has to be accessible via an API or CLI by equivalent, I guess, to an agent in a machine readable format. So for example, your CLI needs to have like a JSON mode or something like that. And if your product is not accessible, like there is no UI basically, right? In the world of agents don't see, they just make tool calls. They make a tool call and then they see the response. So if the agent cannot make a tool call to do what it wants, then that's basically the UI layer. Any other thoughts?
I think that interfaces have become more important, not less, as we spend more time, like as the agents kind of do more. Because now we're back to attention economy. We're back to the place where it's like, oh, the agent can only surface like a few things. And what do we surface? What controls do we give? This is why I'm very bullish on like generative UI. And I think that that's a huge reckoning that's about to come as we start seeing like, one common example is like nowadays, instead of just pushing up a PR, I will create a review site. Like I'll just create a mini site that I share with the people that are reviewing it, showing exactly what I did, like the system diagram and all the screenshots that the agent walked through. Like the UI is going to become both commoditized, and the attention that we give to the UI, I think, is going to become extremely, extremely valuable.
Great point. Okay, I am told that we all have to evacuate this room, but the speakers will hang around if you want to talk to them outside near the popcorn area. And last but not least, as you evacuate the room, shameless plug from me. So we are still in closed beta for Dedalus's persistent VMs, but we are 10% cheaper than market. We are persistent with true live migrations, and we're really simple to use, and we can support your entire platform because everything we have has API access for your agents and just your coding agents. Therefore, and if you're interested, we're hosting 2 more events. We're hosting a workshop tomorrow where we will help your agent become more accessible to all the agent available tools out there and also our VM. And we're also hosting a super cool after party where we have a fashion runway. We will have models, like real life models walking, not AI models, unfortunately, real life models walking the runway with our new merch line, which I am wearing. If you're interested, get a merch. I think we still have some, I'm not sure. And every guest that comes is gonna be given a quest where you have to interact with other guests to complete some adventurous thing. I think it's really cool. And you all get your own agent and you sign in through AgentMail. So you will be texting your agent in our event as you watch the models walk the runway. How cool is that? And we have DJs. Come. Thank you all so much, and thank you for the panelists. I learned a lot today.